This is Fyodor Dostoyevsky's Crime and Punishment, a work in the public domain. Chapter 5. When next morning, at 11 o'clock, punctually Raskolnikov went into the department of the investigation of criminal causes and sent his name in to Porfiry Petrovitch, he was surprised at being kept waiting so long. It was at least 10 minutes before he was summoned. He had expected that they would pounce upon him. But he stood in the waiting room, and people who apparently had nothing to do with him were continually passing to and fro before him. In the next room, which looked like an office, several clerks were sitting writing, and obviously they had no notion who or what Raskolnikov might be. He looked uneasily and suspiciously about him to see whether there was not some guard, some mysterious watch being kept on him to prevent his escape. But there was nothing of the sort. He saw only the faces of clerks absorbed in petty details. Then other people. No one seemed to have any concern with him. He might go where he liked for them. The conviction grew stronger in him that if that enigmatic man of yesterday, that phantom sprung out of the earth, had seen everything, they would not have let him stand and wait like that. And would they have waited till he elected to appear at 11? Either the man had not yet given information, or simply he knew nothing, had seen nothing. And how could he have seen anything? And so all that had happened to him the day before was again a phantom, exaggerated by his sick and overstrained imagination. This conjecture had begun to grow strong the day before, in the midst of all his alarm and despair. Thinking it all over now and preparing for a fresh conflict, he was suddenly aware that he was trembling, and he felt a rush of indignation at the thought that he was trembling with fear at facing that hateful Porfiry Petrovitch. What he dreaded above all was meeting that man again. He hated him with an intense, unmitigated hatred, and was afraid his hatred might betray him. His indignation was such that he ceased trembling at once. He made ready to go in with a cold and arrogant bearing, and vowed to himself to keep as silent as possible, to watch and listen, and for once at least to control his overstrained nerves. At that moment he was summoned to Porfiry Petrovitch. He found Porfiry Petrovitch alone in his study. His study was a room neither large nor small, furnished with a large writing table that stood before a sofa, upholstered in checked material, a bureau, a bookcase in the corner, and several chairs, all government furniture, of polished yellow wood. In the further wall there was a closed door. Beyond it there were no doubt other rooms. On Raskolnikov's entrance, Porfiry Petrovitch had at once closed the door by which he had come in, and they remained alone. He met his visitor with an apparently genial and good-tempered air, and it was only after a few minutes that Raskolnikov saw signs of a certain awkwardness in him, as though he had been thrown out of his reckoning or caught in something very secret. "Ah, my dear fellow, here you are in our domain," began Porfiry, holding out both hands to him. "Come, sit down, old man, or perhaps you don't like to be called my dear fellow and old man, tout court. Please don't think it too familiar. Here, on the sofa." Raskolnikov sat down, keeping his eyes fixed on him. In our domain, the apologies for familiarity, the French phrase tout court, were all characteristic signs. He held out both hands to me, but he did not give me one. He drew it back in time, struck him suspiciously. Both were watching each other, but when their eyes met, quick as lightning they looked away. "I brought you this paper, about the watch. Here it is. Is it all right, or shall I copy it again?" "What, a paper?" Yes, don't be uneasy, it's all right," Porfiry Petrovitch said as though in haste, and after he had said it he took the paper and looked at it. "Yes, it's all right. Nothing more is needed," he declared with the same rapidity, and he laid the paper on the table. A minute later, when he was talking of something else, he took it from the table and put it on his bureau. "I believe you said yesterday you would like to question me, formally, about my acquaintance with the murdered woman," Raskolnikov was beginning again. "Why did I put in 'I believe'?" passed through his mind in a flash. "Why am I so uneasy at having put in that 'I believe'?" came in a second flash. And he suddenly felt that his uneasiness at the mere contact with Porfiry, at the first words, at the first looks, had grown in an instant to monstrous proportions, and that this was fearfully dangerous. His nerves were quivering, his emotion was increasing. It's bad. I shall say too much again." Yes. "There's no hurry, there's no hurry," muttered Porfiry Petrovitch, moving to and fro about the table without any apparent aim, as it were making dashes towards the window, the bureau and the table, at one moment avoiding Raskolnikov's suspicious glance, then again standing still and looking him straight in the face. His fat round little figure looked very strange, like a ball rolling from one side to the other and rebounding back. "We've plenty of time. Do smoke. Have you your own? Here, a cigarette," he went on, offering his visitor a cigarette. "You know I am receiving you here, but my own quarters are through there, you know, my government quarters. But I am living outside for the time. I had to have some repairs done here. It's almost finished now. Government quarters, you know, are a capital thing, eh? What do you think?" "Yes, a capital thing," answered Raskolnikov, looking at him almost ironically. A capital thing, repeated Porfiry Petrovitch, as though he had just thought of something quite different. "Yes, a capital thing," he almost shouted at last, suddenly staring at Raskolnikov and stopping short 2 steps from him. This stupid repetition was too incongruous in its ineptitude with the serious, brooding and enigmatic glance he turned upon his visitor. But this stirred Raskolnikov's spleen more than ever, and he could not resist an ironical and rather incautious challenge. "Tell me, please," he asked suddenly, looking almost insolently at him and taking a kind of pleasure in his own insolence. "I believe it's a sort of legal rule, a sort of legal tradition, for all investigating lawyers, to begin their attack from afar with a trivial or at least an irrelevant subject, so as to encourage, or rather to divert the man they are cross-examining, to disarm his caution, and then all at once to give him an unexpected knock-down blow with some fatal question. Isn't that so? It's a sacred tradition mentioned, I fancy, in all the manuals of the art?" "Yes, yes. Why, do you imagine that was why I spoke about government quarters, eh?" And as he said this, Porfiry Petrovitch screwed up his eyes and winked. A good-humoured, crafty look passed over his face. The wrinkles on his forehead were smoothed out, his eyes contracted, his features broadened, and he suddenly went off into a nervous, prolonged laugh, shaking all over and looking Raskolnikov straight in the face. The latter forced himself to laugh too, but when Porfiry, seeing that he was laughing, broke into such a guffaw that he turned almost crimson, Raskolnikov's repulsion overcame all precaution. He left off laughing, scowled and stared with hatred at Porfiry, keeping his eyes fixed on him while his intentionally prolonged laughter lasted. There was lack of precaution on both sides, however, for Porfiry Petrovitch seemed to be laughing in his visitor's face, and to be very little disturbed at the annoyance with which the visitor received it. The latter fact was very significant in Raskolnikov's eyes. He saw that Porfiry Petrovitch had not been embarrassed just before either, but that he, Raskolnikov, had perhaps fallen into a trap, that there must be something, some motive here unknown to him, that perhaps everything was in readiness and in another moment would break upon him. He went straight to the point at once, rose from his seat and took his cap. "Porfiry Petrovitch," he began resolutely, though with considerable irritation. "Yesterday you expressed a desire that I should come to you for some inquiries." He laid special stress on the word inquiries. "I have come, and if you have anything to ask me, ask it, and if not, allow me to withdraw. I have no time to spare. I have to be at the funeral of that man who was run over, of whom you know also," he added, feeling angry at once at having made this addition and more irritated at his anger. "I am sick of it all, do you hear, and have long been. It's partly what made me ill. In short," he shouted, feeling that the phrase about his illness was still more out of place, "in short, kindly examine me or let me go at once, and if you must examine me, do so in the proper form. I will not allow you to do so otherwise, and so meanwhile, goodbye, as we have evidently nothing to keep us now." "Good heavens! What do you mean? What shall I question you about?" cackled Porfiry Petrovitch with a change of tone, instantly leaving off laughing. "Please don't disturb yourself," he began fidgeting from place to place and fussily making Raskolnikov sit down. There's no hurry, it's all nonsense. Oh no, I'm very glad you've come to see me at last. I look upon you simply as a visitor, and as for my confounded laughter, please excuse it, Rodion Romanovitch." "Rodion Romanovitch, that is your name?" "It's my nerves. You tickle me so with your witty observation. I assure you, sometimes I shake with laughter like an India rubber ball for half an hour at a time. I'm often afraid of an attack of paralysis. Do sit down. Please do, or I shall think you are angry." Raskolnikov did not speak. He listened, watching him, still frowning angrily. He did sit down, but still held his cap. "I must tell you one thing about myself, my dear Rodion Romanovitch," Porfiry Petrovitch continued, moving about the room and again avoiding his visitor's eyes. "You see, I'm a bachelor, a man of no consequence and not used to society. Besides, I have nothing before me. I'm set, I'm running to seed, and have you noticed, Rodion Romanovitch, that in our Petersburg circles, if two clever men meet who are not intimate, but respect each other like you and me, it takes them half an hour before they can find a subject for conversation? They are dumb. They sit opposite each other and feel awkward. Everyone has subjects of conversation, ladies for instance." "People in high society always have their subjects of conversation," said de rigueur, "but people of the middle sort like us, thinking people, that is, are always tongue-tied and awkward. What is the reason of it? Whether it is the lack of public interest, or whether it is we are so honest we don't want to deceive one another, I don't know. What do you think? Do put down your cap. It looks as if you were just going. It makes me uncomfortable. I am so delighted." Raskolnikov put down his cap and continued listening in silence with a serious frowning face to the vague and empty chatter of Porfiry Petrovitch. Does he really want to distract my attention with his silly babble? "I can't offer you coffee here, but why not spend 5 minutes with a friend?" Porfiry pattered on. "And you know all these official duties. Please don't mind my running up and down. Excuse it, my dear fellow. I am very much afraid of offending you, but exercise is absolutely indispensable for me. I'm always sitting and so glad to be moving about for 5 minutes. I suffer from my sedentary life. I always intend to join a gymnasium. They say that officials of all ranks, even privy councillors, may be seen skipping gaily there. There you have it, modern science. Yes, yes, but as for my duties here, inquiries and all such formalities. You mentioned inquiries yourself just now. I assure you these interrogations are sometimes more embarrassing for the interrogator than for the interrogated. You made the observation yourself just now very aptly and wittily." Raskolnikov had made no observation of the kind. "One gets into a muddle, a regular muddle. One keeps harping on the same note, like a drum. There is to be a reform, and we shall be called by a different name, at least he. And as for our legal tradition, as you so wittily called it, I thoroughly agree with you. Every prisoner on trial, even the rudest peasant, knows that they begin by disarming him with irrelevant questions, as you so happily put it, and then deal him a knock-down blow. He, your felicitous comparison, he. So you really imagine that I meant by government quarters, you are an ironical person. Come, I won't go on. Ah, by the way, yes, one word leads to another. You spoke of formality just now, apropos of the inquiry, you know. But what's the use of formality? In many cases it's nonsense. Sometimes one has a friendly chat and gets a good deal more out of it. One can always fall back on formality, allow me to assure you. And after all, what does it amount to? An examining lawyer cannot be bounded by formality at every step. The work of investigation is, so to speak, a free art in its own way. Porfiry Petrovitch took breath a moment. He had simply babbled on, uttering empty phrases, letting slip a few enigmatic words, and again reverting to incoherence. He was almost running about the room, moving his fat little legs quicker and quicker, looking at the ground, with his right hand behind his back, while with his left making gesticulations that were extraordinarily incongruous with his words. Raskolnikov suddenly noticed that as he ran about the room he seemed twice to stop for a moment near the door, as though he were listening. Is he expecting anything? "You are certainly quite right about it," Porfiry began gaily, looking with extraordinary simplicity at Raskolnikov, which startled him and instantly put him on his guard. "Certainly quite right in laughing so wittily at our legal forms. He! Some of these elaborate psychological methods are exceedingly ridiculous and perhaps useless if one adheres too closely to the forms. Yes, I am talking of forms again. Well, if I recognize, or more strictly speaking, if I suspect someone or other to be a criminal in any case entrusted to me. You're reading for the law, of course, Rodion Romanovich? Yes, I was. Well, then it is a precedent for you for the future, though don't suppose I should venture to instruct you after the articles you publish about crime. No, I simply make bold to state it by way of fact. If I took this man or that for a criminal, why, I ask, should I worry him prematurely, even though I had evidence against him? In one case I may be bound, for instance, to arrest a man at once, but another may be in quite a different position, you know, so why shouldn't I let him walk about the town a bit? He. But I see you don't quite understand, so I'll give you a clearer example. If I put him in prison too soon, I may very likely give him, so to speak, moral support. You're laughing. Raskolnikov had no idea of laughing. He was sitting with compressed lips, his feverish eyes fixed on Porfiry Petrovitch's. Yet that is the case, with some types especially, for men are so different. You say evidence. Well, there may be evidence, but evidence, you know, can generally be taken two ways. I am an examining lawyer and a weak man, I confess it. I should like to make a proof, so to say, mathematically clear. I should like to make a chain of evidence such as twice 2 are 4. It ought to be a direct, irrefutable proof, and if I shut him up too soon, even though I might be convinced he was the man, I should very likely be depriving myself of the means of getting further evidence against him. And how? By giving him, so to speak, a definite position. I shall put him out of suspense and set his mind at rest, so that he will retreat into his shell. They say that at Sevastopol, soon after Alma, the clever people were in a terrible fright that the enemy would attack openly and take Sevastopol at once. But when they saw that the enemy preferred a regular siege, they were delighted, I am told, and reassured, for the thing would drag on for 2 months at least. You're laughing. You don't believe me again. Of course you're right too. You're right. You're right. These are special cases, I admit. But you must observe this, my dear Rodion Romanovich, the general case, the case for which all legal forms and rules are intended, for which they are calculated and laid down in books, does not exist at all, for the reason that every case, every crime, for instance, so soon as it actually occurs, at once becomes a thoroughly special case and sometimes a case unlike any that's gone before. Very comic cases of that sort sometimes occur. If I leave one man quite alone, if I don't touch him and don't worry him, but let him know or at least suspect every moment that I know all about it and am watching him day and night, and if he is in continual suspicion and terror, he'll be bound to lose his head. He'll come of himself, or maybe do something which will make it as plain as twice 2 are 4. It's delightful. It may be so with a simple peasant, but with one of our sort, an intelligent man cultivated on a certain side, it's a dead certainty. For, my dear fellow, it's a very important matter to know on what side a man is cultivated. And then there are nerves. There are nerves, you have overlooked them. Why, they are all sick, nervous and irritable. And then how they all suffer from spleen, that I assure you is a regular gold mine for us. And it's no anxiety to me, his running about the town free. Let him walk about for a bit. I know well enough that I've caught him, and that he won't escape me. Where could he escape to, he? Abroad, perhaps? A Pole will escape abroad, but not here, especially as I am watching and have taken measures. Will he escape into the depths of the country, perhaps? But you know, peasants live there, real rude Russian peasants. A modern cultivated man would prefer prison to living with such strangers as our peasants. But that's all nonsense, and on the surface. It's not merely that he has nowhere to run to, he is psychologically unable to escape me. What an expression! Through a law of nature he can't escape me if he had anywhere to go. Have you seen a butterfly round a candle? That's how he will keep circling and circling round me. Freedom will lose its attractions. He'll begin to brood, he'll weave a tangle round himself, he'll worry himself to death. What's more, he will provide me with a mathematical proof, if I only give him long enough interval. And he'll keep circling round me, getting nearer, and then, flop, he'll fly straight into my mouth and I'll swallow him, and that will be very amusing. You don't believe me." Raskolnikov made no reply. He sat pale and motionless, still gazing with the same intensity into Porfiry's face. "It's a lesson," he thought, turning cold. "This is beyond the cat playing with a mouse like yesterday. He can't be showing off his power with no motive, prompting me. He is far too clever for that. He must have another object. What is it? It's all nonsense, my friend. You are pretending to scare me. You've no proofs, and the man I saw had no real existence. You simply want to make me lose my head, to work me up beforehand and so to crush me. But you are wrong. You won't do it." "But why give me such a hint? Is he reckoning on my shattered nerves?" "No, my friend, you are wrong. You won't do it, even though you have some trap for me. Let us see what you have in store for me." And he braced himself to face a terrible and unknown ordeal. At times he longed to fall on Porfiry and strangle him. This anger was what he dreaded from the beginning. He felt that his parched lips were flecked with foam, his heart was throbbing. But he was still determined not to speak till the right moment. He realized that this was the best policy in his position, because instead of saying too much, he would be irritating his enemy by his silence and provoking him into speaking too freely. Anyhow, this was what he hoped for. "No, I see you don't believe me. You think I am playing a harmless joke on you," Porfiry began again, getting more and more lively, chuckling at every instant and again pacing round the room. "And to be sure you're right. God has given me a figure that can awaken none but comic ideas in other people, a buffoon. But let me tell you, and I repeat it, excuse an old man, my dear Rodion Romanovitch. You are a man still young, so to say, in your first youth, and so you put intellect above everything, like all young people. Playful wit and abstract arguments fascinate you, and that's for all the world like the old Austrian Hof Kriegsrath, as far as I can judge of military matters. That is, on paper they'd beaten Napoleon and taken him prisoner, and there in their study they worked it all out in the cleverest fashion. But look you, General Max surrendered with all his army. He. I see, Rodion Romanovitch, you are laughing at a civilian like me, taking examples out of military history. But I can't help it, it's my weakness. I am fond of military science, and I'm ever so fond of reading all military histories. I've certainly missed my proper career. I ought to have been in the army, upon my word I ought. I shouldn't have been a Napoleon, but I might have been a major. Well, I'll tell you the whole truth, my dear fellow, about this special case, I mean, actual fact, and a man's temperament, my dear sir, are weighty matters, and it's astonishing how they sometimes deceive the sharpest calculation. I listen to an old man. I'm speaking seriously, Rodion Romanovitch. As he said, this Porfiry Petrovitch, who was scarcely 35, actually seemed to have grown old. Even his voice changed, and he seemed to shrink together. Moreover, I'm a candid man. Am I a candid man or not? What do you say? I fancy I really am. I tell you these things for nothing, and don't even expect a reward for it. Well, to proceed, wit, in my opinion, is a splendid thing. It is, so to say, an adornment of nature and a consolation of life, and what tricks it can play. So that it sometimes is hard for a poor examining lawyer to know where he is, especially when he's liable to be carried away by his own fancy too, for you know he is a man after all. But the poor fellow is saved by the criminal's temperament, worse luck for him. But young people carried away by their own wit don't think of that when they overstep all obstacles, as you wittily and cleverly expressed it yesterday. He will lie. That is, the man who is a special case, the incognito, and he will lie well, in the cleverest fashion. You might think he would triumph and enjoy the fruits of his wit, but at the most interesting, the most flagrant moment he will faint. Of course there may be illness and a stuffy room as well, but anyway, he's given us the idea. He lied incomparably, but he didn't reckon on his temperament. That's what betrays him. Another time he will be carried away by his playful wit into making fun of the man who suspects him. He will turn pale, as it were, on purpose to mislead. But his paleness will be too natural, too much like the real thing. Again he has given us an idea. Though his questioner may be deceived at first, he will think differently next day if he is not a fool, and, of course, It is like that at every step. He puts himself forward where he is not wanted, speaks continually when he ought to keep silent, brings in all sorts of allegorical allusions. He comes and asks, "Why didn't you take me long ago?" He. And that can happen, you know, with the cleverest man, the psychologist, the literary man. The temperament reflects everything like a mirror. Gaze into it and admire what you see. But why are you so pale, Rodion Romanovitch? Is the room stuffy? Shall I open the window? Oh, don't trouble, please, cried Raskolnikov, and he suddenly broke into a laugh. Please, don't trouble. Porfiry stood facing him, paused a moment, and suddenly he too laughed. Raskolnikov got up from the sofa, abruptly checking his hysterical laughter. Porfiry Petrovitch, he began, speaking loudly and distinctly, though his legs trembled and he could scarcely stand. I see clearly at last that you actually suspect me of murdering that old woman and her sister Lizaveta. Let me tell you for my part that I am sick of this. If you find that you have a right to prosecute me legally, to arrest me, then prosecute me, arrest me. But I will not let myself be jeered at to my face and worried. His lips trembled, his eyes glowed with fury, and he could not restrain his voice. I won't allow it, he shouted, bringing his fist down on the table. Do you hear that, Porfiry Petrovitch? I won't allow it. Good heavens! What does it mean? Cried Porfiry Petrovitch, apparently quite frightened. Rodion Romanovitch, my dear fellow, what is the matter with you? I won't allow it, Raskolnikov shouted again. Hush, my dear man, they'll hear and come in. Just think, what could we say to them? Porfiry Petrovitch whispered in horror, bringing his face close to Raskolnikov's. I won't allow it. I won't allow it, Raskolnikov repeated mechanically, but he too spoke in a sudden whisper. Porfiry turned quickly and ran to open the window. Some fresh air, and you must have some water, my dear fellow. You're ill. And he was running to the door to call for some when he found a decanter of water in the corner. Come, drink a little, he whispered, rushing up to him with the decanter. It will be sure to do you good. Porfiry Petrovitch's alarm and sympathy were so natural that Raskolnikov was silent and began looking at him with wild curiosity. He did not take the water, however. Rodion Romanovitch, my dear fellow, you'll drive yourself out of your mind, I assure you. Ach, have some water. Do drink a little. He forced him to take the glass. Raskolnikov raised it mechanically to his lips, but set it on the table again with disgust. Yes, you've had a little attack. You'll bring back your illness again, my dear fellow. Porfiry Petrovitch cackled with friendly sympathy, though he still looked rather disconcerted. Good heavens, you must take more care of yourself. Dmitri Prokofitch was here, came to see me yesterday. I know. I've a nasty, ironical temper, but what they made of it. Good heavens, he came yesterday after you'd been. We dined, and he talked and talked away, and I could only throw up my hands in despair. Did he come from you? But do sit down, for mercy's sake, sit down. No, not from me, but I knew he went to you and why he went, Raskolnikov answered sharply. You knew? I knew. What of it? Why this, Rodion Romanovitch, that I know more than that about you. I know about everything. I know how you went to take a flat at night when it was dark, and how you rang the bell and asked about the blood, so that the workman and the porter did not know what to make of it. Yes, I understand your state of mind at that time, but you'll drive yourself mad like that, upon my word, you'll lose your head. You're full of generous indignation at the wrongs you've received, first from destiny, and then from the police officers, and so you rush from one thing to another to force them to speak out and make an end of it all, because you are sick of all this suspicion and foolishness. That's so, isn't it? I have guessed how you feel, haven't I? Only in that way you'll lose your head, and Razumihin's too. He's too good a man for such a position, you must know that. You are ill, and he is good, and your illness is infectious for him. I'll tell you about it when you are more yourself. But do sit down, for goodness' sake. Please rest, you look shocking. Do sit down. Raskolnikov sat down. He no longer shivered. He was hot all over. In amazement he listened with strained attention to Porfiry Petrovitch, who still seemed frightened as he looked after him with friendly solicitude. But he did not believe a word he said, though he felt a strange inclination to believe. Porfiry's unexpected words about the flat had utterly overwhelmed him. How can it be he knows about the flat then, he thought suddenly, and he tells it me himself? Yes, in our legal practice there was a case almost exactly similar, a case of morbid psychology, Porphyry went on quickly. A man confessed to murder and how he kept it up. It was a regular hallucination. He brought forward facts. He imposed upon everyone and why. He had been partly, but only partly, unintentionally the cause of a murder, and when he knew that he had given the murderers the opportunity, he sank into dejection. It got on his mind and turned his brain. He began imagining things, and he persuaded himself that he was the murderer. But at last the High Court of Appeal went into it, and the poor fellow was acquitted and put under proper care. Thanks to the Court of Appeal. Tut, tut, tut. Why, my dear fellow, you may drive yourself into delirium if you have the impulse to work upon your nerves, to go ringing bells at night and asking about blood. I've studied all this morbid psychology in my practice. A man is sometimes tempted to jump out of a window or from a belfry. Just the same with bell ringing. It's all illness, Rodion Romanovich. You have begun to neglect your illness. You should consult an experienced doctor. What's the good of that fat fellow? You are light-headed. You were delirious when you did all this. For a moment, Raskolnikov felt everything going round. Is it possible, flashed through his mind, that he is still lying? He can't be. He rejected that idea, feeling to what a degree of fury it might drive him, feeling that that fury might drive him mad. I was not delirious. I knew what I was doing, he cried, straining every faculty to penetrate Porphyry's game. I was quite myself, do you hear? Yes, I hear and understand. You said yesterday you were not delirious. You were particularly emphatic about it. I understand all you can tell me. Listen, Rodion Romanovich, my dear fellow. If you were actually a criminal, or were somehow mixed up in this damnable business, would you insist that you were not delirious but in full possession of your faculties? And so emphatically and persistently, would it be possible? Quite impossible to my thinking. If you had anything on your conscience, you certainly ought to insist that you were delirious. That's so, isn't it? There was a note of slyness in this inquiry. Raskolnikov drew back on the sofa as Porphyry bent over him and stared in silent perplexity at him. Another thing about Razumihin. You certainly ought to have said that he came of his own accord, to have concealed your part in it. But you don't conceal it. You lay stress on his coming at your instigation. Raskolnikov had not done so. A chill went down his back. You keep telling lies, he said slowly and weakly, twisting his lips into a sickly smile. You are trying again to show that you know all my game, that you know all I shall say beforehand, he said, conscious himself that he was not weighing his words as he ought. You want to frighten me. Or you are simply laughing at me. He still stared at him as he said this, and again there was a light of intense hatred in his eyes. You keep lying, he said. You know perfectly well that the best policy for the criminal is to tell the truth as nearly as possible, to conceal as little as possible. I don't believe you. What a wily person you are, Porphyry tittered. There's no catching you, you've a perfect monomania. So you don't believe me? But still, you do believe me. You believe a quarter, I'll soon make you believe the whole, because I have a sincere liking for you and genuinely wish you good. Raskolnikov's lips trembled. Yes, I do, went on Porphyry, touching Raskolnikov's arm genially. You must take care of your illness. Besides, your mother and sister are here now. You must think of them. You must soothe and comfort them, and you do nothing but frighten them. What has that to do with you? What has that to do with you? How do you know it? What concern is it of yours? You are keeping watch on me and want to let me know it. Good heavens! Why, I learnt it all from you yourself. You don't notice that in your excitement you tell me and others everything. From Razumihin, too, I learnt a number of interesting details yesterday. No, you interrupted me, but I must tell you that, for all your wit, your suspiciousness makes you lose the common-sense view of things. To return to bell-ringing, for instance. I, an examining lawyer, have betrayed a precious thing like that, a real fact, for it is a fact worth having, and you see nothing in it. Why? If I had the slightest suspicion of you, should I have acted like that? No, I should first have disarmed your suspicions and not let you see I knew of that fact. Should have diverted your attention and suddenly have dealt you a knockdown blow, your expression saying, "And what were you doing, sir, pray, at 10 or nearly 11 at the murdered woman's flat? And why did you ring the bell? And why did you ask about blood? And why did you invite the porters to go with you to the police station, to the lieutenant? That's how I ought to have acted if I had a grain of suspicion of you. I ought to have taken your evidence in due form, searched your lodging, and perhaps have arrested you too, so I have no suspicion of you, since I have not done that. But you can't look at it normally, and you see nothing, I say again." Raskolnikov started so that Porfiry Petrovitch could not fail to perceive it. "You are lying all the while," he cried. "I don't know your object, but you are lying. You did not speak like that just now, and I cannot be mistaken." "I am lying," Porfiry repeated, apparently incensed, but preserving a good-humoured and ironical face, as though he were not in the least concerned at Raskolnikov's opinion of him. "I am lying. But how did I treat you just now, I, the examining lawyer, prompting you and giving you every means for your defence? Illness, I said, delirium, injury, melancholy, and the police officers and all the rest of it. Ah, he. Though, indeed, all those psychological means of defence are not very reliable and cut both ways. Illness, delirium, I don't remember. That's all right. But why, my good sir? In your illness and in your delirium, were you haunted by just those delusions and not by any others? There may have been others, eh? He. Raskolnikov looked haughtily and contemptuously at him. "Briefly," he said loudly and imperiously, rising to his feet and in so doing pushing Porfiry back a little. "Briefly, I want to know, do you acknowledge me perfectly free from suspicion or not? Tell me, Porfiry Petrovitch, tell me once for all and make haste." "What a business I'm having with you," cried Porfiry with a perfectly good-humoured, sly and composed face. "And why do you want to know? Why do you want to know so much, since they haven't begun to worry you? Why? You are like a child asking for matches. And why are you so uneasy? Why do you force yourself upon us, eh?" "I repeat," Raskolnikov cried furiously, "that I can't put up with it." "With what? Uncertainty," interrupted Porfiry. "Don't jeer at me. I won't have it. I tell you, I won't have it. I can't, and I won't, do you hear? Do you hear?" he shouted, bringing his fist down on the table again. "Hush, hush, they'll overhear. I warn you seriously, take care of yourself." "I am not joking," Porfiry whispered, but this time there was not the look of old womanish good nature and alarm in his face. Now he was peremptory, stern, frowning, and for once laying aside all mystification. But this was only for an instant. Raskolnikov, bewildered, suddenly fell into actual frenzy, but strange to say, he again obeyed the command to speak quietly, though he was in a perfect paroxysm of fury. "I will not allow myself to be tortured," he whispered, instantly recognizing with hatred that he could not help obeying the command and driven to even greater fury by the thought. "Arrest me, search me, but kindly act in due form and don't play with me, don't dare." "Don't worry about the form," Porfiry interrupted with the same sly smile, as it were, gloating with enjoyment over Raskolnikov. "I invited you to see me quite in a friendly way. I don't want your friendship, and I spit on it. Do you hear? And here, I take my cap and go. What will you say now if you mean to arrest me?" He took up his cap and went to the door. "And won't you see my little surprise?" chuckled Porfiry, again taking him by the arm and stopping him at the door. He seemed to become more playful and good-humoured, which maddened Raskolnikov. "What surprise?" he asked, standing still and looking at Porfiry in alarm. "My little surprise. It's sitting there behind the door. He pointed to the locked door. I locked him in that he should not escape." "What is it? Where? What?" Raskolnikov walked to the door and would have opened it, but it was locked. "It's locked. Here is the key." And he brought a key out of his pocket. "You are lying," roared Raskolnikov without restraint. "You lie, you damned Punchinello!" And he rushed at Porfiry, who retreated to the other door, not at all alarmed. "I understand it all. You are lying and mocking so that I may betray myself to you. Why? You could not betray yourself any further, my dear Rodion Romanovitch. You are in a passion. Don't shout, I shall call the clerks. You are lying. Call the clerks. You knew I was ill and tried to work me into a frenzy to make me betray myself. That was your object. Produce your facts. I understand it all. You've no evidence. You have only wretched, rubbishly suspicions like Zamatov's. You knew my character. You wanted to drive me to fury and then to knock me down with priests and deputies. Are you waiting for them? What are you waiting for? Where are they? Produce them. Why deputies, my good man? What things people will imagine. And to do so would not be acting in form, as you say. You don't know the business, my dear fellow. And there's no escaping form, as you see, Porfiry muttered, listening at the door through which a noise could be heard. Ah, they're coming, cried Raskolnikov. You sent for them. You expected them. Well, produce them all, your deputies, your witnesses, what you like. I am ready. But at this moment a strange incident occurred. Something so unexpected that neither Raskolnikov nor Porfiry Petrovitch could have looked for such a conclusion to their interview. Chapter 6. When he remembered the scene afterwards, this is how Raskolnikov saw it. The noise behind the door increased, and suddenly the door was opened a little. "What is it?" cried Porfiry Petrovitch, annoyed. "Why, I gave orders." For an instant there was no answer, but it was evident that there were several persons at the door, and that they were apparently pushing somebody back. What is it?" Porfiry Petrovitch repeated uneasily. "The prisoner Nikolai has been brought," someone answered. "He is not wanted. Take him away. Let him wait. What's he doing here? How irregular!" cried Porfiry, rushing to the door. "But he," began the same voice, and suddenly ceased. 2 seconds, not more, were spent in actual struggle. Then someone gave a violent shove, and then a man, very pale, strode into the room. This man's appearance was at first sight very strange. He stared straight before him, as though seeing nothing. There was a determined gleam in his eyes. At the same time there was a deathly pallor in his face, as though he were being led to the scaffold. His white lips were faintly twitching. He was dressed like a workman, and was of medium height, very young, slim, his hair cut in round crop, with thin, spare features. The man whom he had thrust back followed him into the room and succeeded in seizing him by the shoulder. He was a warder, but Nikolai pulled his arm away. Several persons crowded inquisitively into the doorway. Some of them tried to get in. All this took place almost instantaneously. "Go away, it's too soon. Wait till you are sent for. Why have you brought him so soon?" Porfiry Petrovitch muttered, extremely annoyed, and as it were thrown out of his reckoning. But Nikolai suddenly knelt down. "What's the matter?" cried Porfiry, surprised. "I am guilty. Mine is the sin. I am the murderer," Nikolai articulated suddenly, rather breathless, but speaking fairly loudly. For 10 seconds there was silence, as though all had been struck dumb. Even the warder stepped back, mechanically retreated to the door, and stood immovable. "What is it?" cried Porfiry Petrovitch, recovering from his momentary stupefaction. "I am the murderer," repeated Nikolai, after a brief pause. "What? You? What? Whom did you kill?" Porfiry Petrovitch was obviously bewildered. Nikolai again was silent for a moment. "Alyona Ivanovna and her sister Lizaveta Ivanovna, I killed with an axe. Darkness came over me," he added suddenly, and was again silent. He still remained on his knees. Porfiry Petrovitch stood for some moments as though meditating, but suddenly roused himself and waved back the uninvited spectators. They instantly vanished and closed the door. Then he looked towards Raskolnikov, who was standing in the corner, staring wildly at Nikolai, and moved towards him, but stopped short, looked from Nikolai to Raskolnikov, and then again at Nikolai, and seeming unable to restrain himself, darted at the latter. "You're in too great a hurry," he shouted at him almost angrily. "I didn't ask you what came over you. Speak, did you kill them?" "I am the murderer. I want to give evidence," Nikolai pronounced. "Ah, what did you kill them with? An axe. I had it ready. Ah, he is in a hurry." "Alone?" Nikolai did not understand the question. "Did you do it alone?" "Yes, alone, and Mitka is not guilty and had no share in it." "Don't be in a hurry about Mitka." "Ah, Ak, how was it you ran downstairs like that at the time? The porters met you both." It was to put them off the scent. "I ran after Mitka," Nikolai replied hurriedly, as though he had prepared the answer. "I knew it," cried Porfiry with vexation. "It's not his own tale he is telling," he muttered as though to himself, and suddenly his eyes rested on Raskolnikov again. He was apparently so taken up with Nikolai that for a moment he had forgotten Raskolnikov. He was a little taken aback. "My dear Rodion Romanovitch, excuse me." He flew up to him. "This won't do. I'm afraid you must go. It's no good your staying. I will, you see. What a surprise. Goodbye." And taking him by the arm, he showed him to the door. "I suppose you didn't expect it," said Raskolnikov, who, though he had not yet fully grasped the situation, had regained his courage. "You did not expect it either, my friend. See how your hand is trembling." You're trembling too, Porfiry Petrovitch." "Yes, I am. I didn't expect it." They were already at the door. Porfiry was impatient for Raskolnikov to be gone. "And your little surprise, aren't you going to show it to me?" Raskolnikov said sarcastically. "Why, his teeth are chattering as he asks. You are an ironical person." "Come, till we meet. I believe we can say goodbye." "That's in God's hands," muttered Porfiry with an unnatural smile. As he walked through the office, Raskolnikov noticed that many people were looking at him. Among them he saw the two porters from the house, whom he had invited that night to the police station. They stood there waiting, but he was no sooner on the stairs than he heard the voice of Porfiry Petrovitch behind him. Turning round, he saw the latter running after him, out of breath. "One word, Rodion Romanovitch. As to all the rest, it's in God's hands, but as a matter of form there are some questions I shall have to ask you, so we shall meet again, shan't we?" And Porfiry stood still, facing him with a smile. "Shan't we?" he added again. He seemed to want to say something more, but could not speak out. "You must forgive me, Porfiry Petrovitch, for what has just passed. I lost my temper," began Raskolnikov, who had so far regained his courage that he felt irresistibly inclined to display his coolness. Don't mention it, Porfiry replied almost gleefully. "I myself too. I have a wicked temper, I admit it. But we shall meet again. If it's God's will, we may see a great deal of one another." "And we'll get to know each other through and through," added Raskolnikov. "Yes, know each other through and through," assented Porfiry Petrovitch, and he screwed up his eyes, looking earnestly at Raskolnikov. "Now you're going to a birthday party?" "To a funeral." "Of course, the funeral. Take care of yourself and get well." "I don't know what to wish you," said Raskolnikov, who had begun to descend the stairs, but looked back again. "I should like to wish you success, but your office is such a comical one." "Why comical?" Porfiry Petrovitch had turned to go, but he seemed to prick up his ears at this. "Why, how you must have been torturing and harassing that poor Nikolai psychologically after your fashion till he confessed. You must have been at him day and night, proving to him that he was the murderer, and now that he has confessed, you'll begin vivisecting him again. You are lying, you'll say. You are not the murderer. You can't be. It's not your own tale you are telling. You must admit it's a comical business." You noticed then that I said to Nikolai just now that it was not his own tale he was telling. How could I help noticing it? You are quick-witted. You notice everything. You've really a playful mind. And you always fasten on the comic side. They say that was the marked characteristic of Gogol among the writers. Yes, of Gogol. I shall look forward to meeting you. So shall I. Raskolnikov walked straight home. He was so muddled and bewildered that on getting home he sat for a quarter of an hour on the sofa, trying to collect his thoughts. He did not attempt to think about Nikolai. He was stupefied. He felt that his confession was something inexplicable, amazing, something beyond his understanding. But Nikolai's confession was an actual fact. The consequences of this fact were clear to him at once. Its falsehood could not fail to be discovered, and then they would be after him again. Till then, at least, he was free, and must do something for himself, for the danger was imminent. But how imminent? His position gradually became clear to him. Remembering, sketchily, the main outlines of his recent scene with Porfiry, he could not help shuddering again with horror. Of course, he did not yet know all Porfiry's aims. He could not see into all his calculations. But he had already partly shown his hand, and no one knew better than Raskolnikov how terrible Porphyry's lead had been for him. A little more, and he might have given himself away completely, circumstantially. Knowing his nervous temperament, and from the first glance seeing through him, Porphyry, though playing a bold game, was bound to win. There's no denying that Raskolnikov had compromised himself seriously, but no facts had come to light as yet. There was nothing positive. But was he taking a true view of the position? Wasn't he mistaken? What had Porphyry been trying to get at? Had he really some surprise prepared for him? And what was it? Had he really been expecting something or not? How would they have parted if it had not been for the unexpected appearance of Nikolai? Porphyry had shown almost all his cards. Of course, he had risked something in showing them. And if he had really had anything up his sleeve, Raskolnikov reflected, he would have shown that too. What was that surprise? Was it a joke? Had it meant anything? Could it have concealed anything like a fact, a piece of positive evidence? His yesterday's visitor? What had become of him? Where was he today? If Porphyry really had any evidence, it must be connected with him. He sat on the sofa with his elbows on his knees and his face hidden in his hands. He was still shivering nervously. At last he got up, took his cap, thought a minute, and went to the door. He had a sort of presentiment that for today, at least, he might consider himself out of danger. He had a sudden sense almost of joy. He wanted to make haste to Katerina Ivanovna's. He would be too late for the funeral, of course, but he would be in time for the memorial dinner, and there at once he would see Sonia. He stood still, thought a moment, and a suffering smile came for a moment onto his lips. Today, today, he repeated to himself. Yes, today, so it must be. But as he was about to open the door, it began opening of itself. He started and moved back. The door opened gently and slowly, and there suddenly appeared a figure. Yesterday's visitor from underground. The man stood in the doorway, looked at Raskolnikov without speaking, and took a step forward into the room. He was exactly the same as yesterday, the same figure, the same dress. But there was a great change in his face. He looked dejected and sighed deeply. If he had only put his hand up to his cheek and leaned his head on one side, he would have looked exactly like a peasant woman. "What do you want?" asked Raskolnikov, numb with terror. The man was still silent, but suddenly he bowed down almost to the ground, touching it with his finger. "What is it?" cried Raskolnikov. "I have sinned," the man articulated softly. "How? By evil thoughts." They looked at one another. "I was vexed. When you came, perhaps in drink, and bade the porters go to the police station and asked about the blood, I was vexed that they let you go and took you for drunken. I was so vexed that I lost my sleep, and remembering the address we came here yesterday and asked for you." "Who came?" Raskolnikov interrupted, instantly beginning to recollect. "I did? I've wronged you? Then you come from that house?" "I was standing at the gate with them, don't you remember? We have carried on our trade in that house for years past. We cure and prepare hides, we take work home. Most of all I was vexed, and the whole scene of the day before yesterday in the gateway came clearly before Raskolnikov's mind. He recollected that there had been several people there besides the porters, women among them. He remembered one voice had suggested taking him straight to the police station. He could not recall the face of the speaker, and even now he did not recognize it, but he remembered that he had turned round and made him some answer. So this was the solution of yesterday's horror. The most awful thought was that he had been actually almost lost, had almost done for himself on account of such a trivial circumstance. So this man could tell nothing except his asking about the flat and the bloodstains. So Porphyry too had nothing but that delirium, no facts but this psychology which cuts both ways, nothing positive. So if no more facts come to light, and they must not, then what can they do to him? How can they convict him, even if they arrest him? And Porphyry then had only just heard about the flat and had not known about it before. Was it you who told Porphyry? That I'd been there, he cried, struck by a sudden idea. What Porphyry? The head of the detective department? Yes, the porters did not go there, but I went. Today. I got there 2 minutes before you, and I heard it all, how he worried you. Where? What? When? Why, in the next room. I was sitting there all the time. What? Why? Then you were the surprise, but how could it happen, upon my word? I saw that the porters did not want to do what I said, began the man. For it's too late, said they, and maybe he'll be angry that we did not come at the time. I was vexed and I lost my sleep, and I began making inquiries, and finding out yesterday where to go, I went too. The first time I went he wasn't there. When I came an hour later he couldn't see me. I went the third time, and they showed me in. I informed him of everything, just as it happened, and he began skipping about the room and punching himself on the chest. What do you scoundrels mean by it? If I'd known about it, I should have arrested him. Then he ran out, called somebody, and began talking to him in the corner. Then he turned to me, scolding and questioning me. He scolded me a great deal, and I told him everything, and I told him that you didn't dare to say a word in answer to me yesterday, and that you didn't recognize me. And he fell to running about again and kept hitting himself on the chest and getting angry and running about, and when you were announced he told me to go into the next room. Sit there a bit, he said, don't move, whatever you may hear. And he set a chair there for me and locked me in. Perhaps, he said, I may call you. And when Nikolai had been brought, he let me out as soon as you were gone. I shall send for you again and question you, he said. And did he question Nikolai while you were there? He got rid of me as he did of you, before he spoke to Nikolai. The man stood still, and again suddenly bowed down, touching the ground with his finger. Forgive me for my evil thoughts and my slander. May God forgive you, answered Raskolnikov. And as he said this, the man bowed down again, but not to the ground, turned slowly and went out of the room. It all cuts both ways. Now it all cuts both ways, repeated Raskolnikov, and he went out more confident than ever. Now we'll make a fight for it, he said, with a malicious smile, as he went down the stairs. His malice was aimed at himself. With shame and contempt he recollected his cowardice. P.R.T. 5. Chapter 1. A morning that followed the fateful interview with Dunya and her mother brought sobering influences to bear on Pyotr Petrovitch. Intensely unpleasant as it was, he was forced little by little to accept as a fact beyond recall what had seemed to him only the day before fantastic and incredible. The black snake of wounded vanity had been gnawing at his heart all night. When he got out of bed, Pyotr Petrovitch immediately looked in the looking-glass. He was afraid that he had jaundice. However, his health seemed unimpaired so far, and looking at his noble, clear-skinned countenance which had grown fattish of late, Pyotr Petrovitch for an instant was positively comforted in the conviction that he would find another bride, and, perhaps, even a better one. But coming back to the sense of his present position, he turned aside and spat vigorously, which excited a sarcastic smile in Andrei Semyonovitch Lebeziatnikov, the young friend with whom he was staying. That smile Pyotr Petrovitch noticed, and at once set it down against his young friend's account. He had set down a good many points against him of late. His anger was redoubled when he reflected that he ought not to have told Andrei Semyonovitch about the result of yesterday's interview. That was the second mistake he had made in temper, through impulsiveness and irritability. Moreover, all that morning one unpleasantness followed another. He even found a hitch awaiting him in his legal case in the Senate. He was particularly irritated by the owner of the flat which had been taken in view of his approaching marriage and was being redecorated at his own expense. The owner, a rich German tradesman, would not entertain the idea of breaking the contract which had just been signed and insisted on the full forfeit money, though Pyotr Petrovitch would be giving him back the flat practically redecorated. In the same way, the upholsterers refused to return a single rouble of the instalment paid for the furniture purchased but not yet removed to the flat. Am I to get married simply for the sake of the furniture? Pyotr Petrovitch ground his teeth, and at the same time once more he had a gleam of desperate hope. Can all that be really so irrevocably over? Is it no use to make another effort? The thought of Dunya sent a voluptuous pang through his heart. He endured anguish at that moment, and if it had been possible to slay Raskolnikov instantly by wishing it, Pyotr Petrovitch would promptly have uttered the wish. It was my mistake, too, not to have given them money, he thought, as he returned dejectedly to Lebeziatnikov's room, and why on earth was I such a Jew? It was false economy. I meant to keep them without a penny, so that they should turn to me as their providence and look at them. Phoo! If I'd spent some 1,500 roubles on them for the trousseau and presents, on knick-knacks, dressing cases, jewellery, materials, and all that sort of trash from Knopp's in the English shop, my position would have been better and stronger. They could not have refused me so easily. They are the sort of people that would feel bound to return money and presents if they broke it off, and they would find it hard to do it, and their conscience would prick them. How can we dismiss a man who has hitherto been so generous and delicate? I've made a blunder. And grinding his teeth again, Pyotr Petrovitch called himself a fool, but not aloud, of course. He returned home, twice as irritated and angry as before. The preparations for the funeral dinner at Katerina Ivanovna's excited his curiosity as he passed. He had heard about it the day before. He fancied, indeed, that he had been invited, but absorbed in his own cares, he had paid no attention. Inquiring of Madame Lipovexel, who was busy laying the table while Katerina Ivanovna was away at the cemetery, he heard that the entertainment was to be a great affair, that all the lodgers had been invited, among them some who had not known the dead man, that even Andrei Semyonovitch Lebeziatnikov was invited in spite of his previous quarrel with Katerina Ivanovna, that he, Pyotr Petrovitch, was not only invited, but was eagerly expected, as he was the most important of the lodgers. Amalia Ivanovna herself had been invited with great ceremony in spite of the recent unpleasantness, and so she was very busy with preparations and was taking a positive pleasure in them. She was moreover dressed up to the nines, all in new black silk, and she was proud of it. All this suggested an idea to Pyotr Petrovitch, and he went into his room, or rather Lebeziatnikov's, somewhat thoughtful. He had learned that Raskolnikov was to be one of the guests. Andrei Semyonovitch had been at home all the morning. The attitude of Pyotr Petrovitch to this gentleman was strange, though perhaps natural. Pyotr Petrovitch had despised and hated him from the day he came to stay with him, and at the same time he seemed somewhat afraid of him. He had not come to stay with him on his arrival in Petersburg simply from parsimony, though that had been perhaps his chief object. He had heard of Andrei Semyonovitch, who had once been his ward, as a leading young progressive who was taking an important part in certain interesting circles, the doings of which were a legend in the provinces. It had impressed Pyotr Petrovitch. These powerful, omniscient circles who despised everyone and showed everyone up had long inspired in him a peculiar but quite vague alarm. He had not, of course, been able to form even an approximate notion of what they meant. He, like everyone, had heard that there were, especially in Petersburg, progressives of some sort, nihilists and so on, and, like many people, he exaggerated and distorted the significance of those words to an absurd degree. What for many years past he had feared more than anything was being shown up, and this was the chief ground for his continual uneasiness at the thought of transferring his business to Petersburg. He was afraid of this as little children are sometimes panic-stricken. Some years before, when he was just entering on his own career, he had come upon 2 cases in which rather important personages in the province, patrons of his, had been cruelly shown up. One instance had ended in great scandal for the person attacked, and the other had very nearly ended in serious trouble. For this reason, Pyotr Petrovitch intended to go into the subject as soon as he reached Petersburg and, if necessary, to anticipate contingencies by seeking the favour of our younger generation. He relied on Andrei Semyonovitch for this, and before his visit to Raskolnikov he had succeeded in picking up some current phrases. He soon discovered that Andrei Semyonovitch was a commonplace simpleton, but that by no means reassured Pyotr Petrovitch. Even if he had been certain that all the progressives were fools like him, it would not have allayed his uneasiness. All the doctrines, the ideas, the systems with which Andrei Semyonovitch pestered him had no interest for him. He had his own object. He simply wanted to find out at once what was happening here. Had these people any power or not? Had he anything to fear from them? Would they expose any enterprise of his? And what precisely was now the object of their attacks? Could he somehow make up to them and get round them if they really were powerful? Was this the thing to do or not? Couldn't he gain something through them? In fact, hundreds of questions presented themselves. Andrei Semyonovitch was an anemic, scrofulous little man, with strangely flaxen mutton-chop whiskers of which he was very proud. He was a clerk, and had almost always something wrong with his eyes. He was rather soft-hearted, but self-confident, and sometimes extremely conceited in speech, which had an absurd effect, incongruous with his little figure. He was one of the lodgers most respected by Amalia Ivanovna, for he did not get drunk and paid regularly for his lodgings. Andrei Semyonovitch really was rather stupid. He attached himself to the cause of progress and our younger generation from enthusiasm. He was one of the numerous and varied legion of dullards, of half-animate abortions, conceited, half-educated coxcombs, who attach themselves to the idea most in fashion only to vulgarize it, and who caricature every cause they serve, however sincerely. Though Lebeziatnikov was so good-natured, he too was beginning to dislike Pyotr Petrovitch. This happened on both sides unconsciously. However simple Andrei Semyonovitch might be, he began to see that Pyotr Petrovitch was duping him and secretly despising him, and that he was not the right sort of man. He had tried expounding to him the system of Fourier and the Darwinian theory, but of late Pyotr Petrovitch began to listen too sarcastically and even to be rude. The fact was, he had begun instinctively to guess that Lebeziatnikov was not merely a commonplace simpleton, but perhaps a liar too, and that he had no connections of any consequence even in his own circle, but had simply picked things up third hand, and that very likely he did not even know much about his own work of propaganda, for he was in too great a muddle. A fine person he would be to show anyone up. It must be noted, by the way, that Pyotr Petrovitch had during those 10 days eagerly accepted the strangest praise from Andrei Semyonovitch. He had not protested, for instance, when Andrei Semyonovitch belauded him for being ready to contribute to the establishment of the new commune, or to abstain from christening his future children, or to acquiesce if Dunya were to take a lover a month after marriage, and so on. Pyotr Petrovitch so enjoyed hearing his own praises that he did not disdain even such virtues when they were attributed to him. Pyotr Petrovitch had had occasion that morning to realize some 5% bonds, and now he sat down to the table and counted over bundles of notes. Andrei Semyonovitch, who hardly ever had any money, walked about the room pretending to himself to look at all those banknotes with indifference and even contempt. Nothing would have convinced Pyotr Petrovitch that Andrei Semyonovitch could really look on the money unmoved, and the latter, on his side, kept thinking bitterly that Pyotr Petrovitch was capable of entertaining such an idea about him, and was, perhaps, glad of the opportunity of teasing his young friend by reminding him of his inferiority and the great difference between them. He found him incredibly inattentive and irritable, though he, Andrei Semyonovitch, began enlarging on his favourite subject, the foundation of a new special commune. The brief remarks that dropped from Pyotr Petrovitch between the clicking of the beads on the reckoning frame betrayed unmistakable and discourteous irony. But the humane Andrei Semyonovitch ascribed Pyotr Petrovitch's ill humour to his recent breach with Dunya, and he was burning with impatience to discourse on that theme. He had something progressive to say on the subject which might console his worthy friend and, could not fail, to promote his development. There is some sort of festivity being prepared at the widow's, isn't there? Pyotr Petrovitch asked suddenly, interrupting Andrei Semyonovitch at the most interesting passage. Why, don't you know? Why, I was telling you last night what I think about all such ceremonies, and she invited you too, I heard. You were talking to her yesterday. I should never have expected that beggarly fool would have spent on this feast all the money she got from that other fool, Raskolnikov. I was surprised just now as I came through at the preparations there, the wines. Several people are invited. It's beyond everything, continued Pyotr Petrovitch, who seemed to have some object in pursuing the conversation. What, you say I am asked too? When was that? I don't remember, but I shan't go. Why should I? I only said a word to her in passing yesterday of the possibility of her obtaining a year's salary as a destitute widow of a government clerk. I suppose she has invited me on that account, hasn't she? He! I don't intend to go either, said Lebeziatnikov. I should think not, after giving her a thrashing. You might well hesitate. Who thrashed whom? Cried Lebeziatnikov, flustered and blushing. Why, you thrashed Katerina Ivanovna a month ago. I heard so yesterday, so that's what your convictions amount to. And the woman questioned too wasn't quite sound, he. And Pyotr Petrovitch, as though comforted, went back to clicking his beads. It's all slander and nonsense, cried Lebeziatnikov, who was always afraid of allusions to the subject. It was not like that at all. It was quite different. You've heard it wrong. It's a libel. I was simply defending myself. She rushed at me first with her nails. She pulled out all my whiskers. It's permissible for anyone, I should hope, to defend himself, and I never allow anyone to use violence to me on principle, for it's an act of despotism. What was I to do? I simply pushed her back. Luzin went on laughing maliciously. You keep on like that because you are out of humour yourself. But that's nonsense, and it has nothing whatever to do with the woman question. You don't understand, I used to think, indeed, that if women are equal to men in all respects, even in strength, as is maintained now, there ought to be equality in that too. Of course, I reflected afterwards that such a question ought not really to arise, for there ought not to be fighting, and in the future society, fighting is unthinkable, and that it would be a queer thing to seek for equality in fighting. I am not so stupid, though. Of course there is fighting. There won't be later, but at present there is. Confound it! How muddled one gets with you! It's not on that account that I am not going. I am not going on principle, not to take part in the revolting convention of memorial dinners, that's why. Though, of course, one might go to laugh at it. I am sorry there won't be any priests at it. I should certainly go if there were. Then you would sit down at another man's table and insult it, and those who invited you. Eh? Certainly not insult, but protest. I should do it with a good object. I might indirectly assist the cause of enlightenment and propaganda. It's a duty of every man to work for enlightenment and propaganda, and the more harshly, perhaps, the better. I might drop a seed, an idea, and something might grow up from that seed. How should I be insulting them? They might be offended at first, but afterwards they'd see I'd done them a service. You know, Terabayeva, who is in the community now, was blamed because, when she left her family and devoted herself, she wrote to her father and mother that she wouldn't go on living conventionally and was entering on a free marriage, and it was said that that was too harsh, that she might have spared them and have written more kindly. I think that's all nonsense, and there's no need of softness. On the contrary, what's wanted is protest. Varents had been married 7 years. She abandoned her 2 children. She told her husband straight out in a letter, I have realized that I cannot be happy with you. I can never forgive you that you have deceived me by concealing from me that there is another organization of society by means of the communities. I have only lately learned it from a great-hearted man to whom I have given myself and with whom I am establishing a community. I speak plainly because I consider it dishonest to deceive you. Do as you think best. Do not hope to get me back, you are too late. I hope you will be happy. That's how letters like that ought to be written. Is that Terabayeva the one you said had made a 3rd free marriage? No, it's only the 2nd really, but what if it were the 4th? What if it were the 15th? That's all nonsense. And if ever I regretted the death of my father and mother, it is now, and I sometimes think if my parents were living what a protest I would have aimed at them. I would have done something on purpose. I would have shown them. I would have astonished them. I am really sorry there is no one. To surprise! Well, be that as you will, Pyotr Petrovitch interrupted. But tell me this, do you know the dead man's daughter, the delicate-looking little thing? It's true what they say about her, isn't it? What of it? I think, that is, it is my own personal conviction that this is the normal condition of women. Why not? I mean, distinct ones. In our present society, it is not altogether normal, because it is compulsory. But in the future society, it will be perfectly normal, because it will be voluntary. Even as it is, she was quite right. She was suffering, and that was her asset, so to speak, her capital, which she had a perfect right to dispose of. Of course, in the future society, there will be no need of assets, but her part will have another significance, rational, and in harmony with her environment. As to Sofya Semyonovna personally, I regard her action as a vigorous protest against the organization of society, and I respect her deeply for it. I rejoice indeed when I look at her. I was told that you got her turned out of these lodgings. Lebeziatnikov was enraged. That's another slander, he yelled. It was not so at all. That was all Katerina Ivanovna's invention, for she did not understand. And I never made love to Sofya Semyonovna. I was simply developing her, entirely disinterestedly, trying to rouse her to protest. All I wanted was her protest, and Sofya Semyonovna could not have remained here anyway. Have you asked her to join your community? You keep on laughing, and very inappropriately. Allow me to tell you, you don't understand. There is no such role in a community. The community is established that there should be no such roles. In a community, such a role is essentially transformed, and what is stupid here is sensible there. What, under present conditions, is unnatural, becomes perfectly natural in the community. It all depends on the environment. It's all the environment, and man himself is nothing. And I am on good terms with Sofya Semyonovna to this day, which is a proof that she never regarded me as having wronged her. I am trying now to attract her to the community, but on quite a different footing. What are you laughing at? We are trying to establish a community of our own, a special one on a broader basis. We have gone further in our convictions. We reject more. And meanwhile, I am still developing Sofya Semyonovna. She has a beautiful, beautiful character. And you take advantage of her fine character, eh? No, oh no, on the contrary. Oh, on the contrary, a queer thing to say, believe me, why should I disguise it? In fact, I feel it strange myself how timid, chaste and modern she is with me, and you, of course, are developing her. Trying to prove to her that all that modesty is nonsense. Not at all, not at all. How coarsely, how stupidly. Excuse me saying so, you misunderstand the word development. Good heavens, how crude you still are. We are striving for the freedom of women, and you have only one idea in your head. Setting aside the general question of chastity and feminine modesty as useless in themselves and indeed prejudices, I fully accept her chastity with me, because that's for her to decide. Of course, if she were to tell me herself that she wanted me, I should think myself very lucky, because I like the girl very much, but as it is, no one has ever treated her more courteously than I, with more respect for her dignity. I wait in hopes, that's all. You had much better make her a present of something. I bet you never thought of that. You don't understand, as I've told you already. Of course, she is in such a position, but it's another question. Quite another question. You simply despise her. Seeing a fact which you mistakenly consider deserving of contempt, you refuse to take a humane view of a fellow creature. You don't know what a character she is. I am only sorry that of late she has quite given up reading and borrowing books. I used to lend them to her. I am sorry, too, that with all the energy and resolution in protesting, which she has already shown once, she has little self-reliance, little, so to say, independence, so as to break free from certain prejudices and certain foolish ideas. Yet she thoroughly understands some questions, for instance about kissing of hands, that is, that it's an insult to a woman for a man to kiss her hand, because it's a sign of inequality. We had a debate about it, and I described it to her. She listened attentively to an account of the workmen's associations in France, too. Now I am explaining the question of coming into the room in the future society. And what's that, pray? We had a debate lately on the question, has a member of the community the right to enter another member's room, whether man or woman, at any time, and we decided that he has. It might be at an inconvenient moment Lebeziatnikov was really angry. You are always thinking of something unpleasant, he cried with aversion. Phoo! Ha! How vexed I am that when I was expounding our system, I referred prematurely to the question of personal privacy. It's always a stumbling block to people like you. They turn it into ridicule before they understand it. And how proud they are of it, too. Phoo! I've often maintained that question should not be approached by a novice till he has a firm faith in the system. And tell me, please, what do you find so shameful even in cesspools? I should be the first to be ready to clean out any cesspool you like. And it's not a question of self-sacrifice. It's simply work, honourable, useful work which is as good as any other and much better than the work of a Raphael and a Pushkin, because it is more useful. And more honourable, he. What do you mean by more honourable? I don't understand such expressions to describe human activity. And more honourable, nobler. All those are old-fashioned prejudices which I reject. Everything which is of use to mankind is honourable. I only understand one word, useful. You can snigger as much as you like, but that's so. Pyotr Petrovitch laughed heartily. He had finished counting the money and was putting it away. But some of the notes he left on the table. The cesspool question had already been a subject of dispute between them. What was absurd was that it made Lebeziatnikov really angry, while it amused Luzine, and at that moment he particularly wanted to anger his young friend. "It's your ill luck yesterday that makes you so ill-humoured and annoying," blurted out Lebeziatnikov, who, in spite of his independence and his protests, did not venture to oppose Pyotr Petrovitch, and still behaved to him with some of the respect habitual in earlier years. "You'd better tell me this," Pyotr Petrovitch interrupted with haughty displeasure. "Can you? Or rather, are you really friendly enough with that young person to ask her to step in here for a minute? I think they've all come back from the cemetery. I heard the sound of steps. I want to see her, that young person." "What for?" Lebeziatnikov asked with surprise. "Oh, I want to. I am leaving here today or tomorrow, and therefore I wanted to speak to her about. However, you may be present during the interview. It's better you should be, indeed, for there's no knowing what you might imagine." "I shan't imagine anything. I only asked, and, if you've anything to say to her, nothing is easier than to call her in." "I'll go directly, and you may be sure I won't be in your way." 5 minutes later, Lebeziatnikov came in with Sonia. She came in very much surprised and overcome with shyness as usual. She was always shy in such circumstances and was always afraid of new people. She had been as a child and was even more so now. Pyotr Petrovitch met her politely and affably, but with a certain shade of bantering familiarity, which in his opinion was suitable for a man of his respectability and weight in dealing with a creature so young and so interesting as she. He hastened to reassure her and made her sit down facing him at the table. Sonia sat down, looked about her, at Lebeziatnikov, at the notes lying on the table, and then again at Pyotr Petrovitch, and her eyes remained riveted on him. Lebeziatnikov was moving to the door. Pyotr Petrovitch signed to Sonia to remain seated and stopped Lebeziatnikov. "Is Raskolnikov in there? Has he come?" he asked him in a whisper. "Raskolnikov? Yes. Why? Yes, he is there. I saw him just come in. Why?" "Well, I particularly beg you to remain here with us and not to leave me alone with this young woman. I only want a few words with her, but God knows what they may make of it. I shouldn't like Raskolnikov to repeat anything. You understand what I mean. I understand." Lebeziatnikov saw the point. "Yes, you are right. Of course, I am convinced personally that you have no reason to be uneasy, but still you are right. Certainly I'll stay. I'll stand here at the window and not be in your way. I think you are right." Pyotr Petrovitch returned to the sofa, sat down opposite Sonia, looked attentively at her, and assumed an extremely dignified, even severe expression, as much as to say, "Don't you make any mistake, madam." Sonia was overwhelmed with embarrassment. "In the first place, Sofya Semyonovna, will you make my excuses to your respected mamma? That's right, isn't it? Katerina Ivanovna stands in the place of a mother to you." Pyotr Petrovitch began with great dignity, though affably. It was evident that his intentions were friendly. "Quite so, yes, the place of a mother," Sonia answered, timidly and hurriedly. "Then will you make my apologies to her? Through inevitable circumstances, I am forced to be absent and shall not be at the dinner in spite of your mamma's kind invitation." "Yes. I'll tell her, at once." And Sonia hastily jumped up from her seat. "That's not all," Pyotr Petrovitch detained her, smiling at her simplicity and ignorance of good manners. "And you know me little, my dear Sofya Semyonovna. if you suppose I would have ventured to trouble a person like you for a matter of so little consequence, affecting myself only. I have another object." Sonia sat down hurriedly. Her eyes rested again for an instant on the grey and rainbow-coloured notes that remained on the table, but she quickly looked away and fixed her eyes on Pyotr Petrovitch. She felt it horribly indecorous, especially for her, to look at another person's money. She stared at the gold eyeglass which Pyotr Petrovitch held in his left hand and at the massive and extremely handsome ring with a yellow stone on his middle finger. But suddenly she looked away and, not knowing where to turn, ended by staring Pyotr Petrovitch again straight in the face. After a pause of still greater dignity, he continued, "I chanced yesterday in passing to exchange a couple of words with Katerina Ivanovna, poor woman. That was sufficient to enable me to ascertain that she is in a position, preternatural, if one may so express it." "Yes, preternatural," Sonia hurriedly assented, "or it would be simpler and more comprehensible to say ill." "Yes, simpler and more comprehend." "Yes, ill, quite so." "So then, from a feeling of humanity and, so to speak, compassion, I should be glad to be of service to her in any way, foreseeing her unfortunate position. I believe the whole of this poverty-stricken family depends now entirely on you." "Allow me to ask," Sonia rose to her feet, "did you say something to her yesterday of the possibility of a pension? Because she told me you had undertaken to get her one. Was that true?" "Not in the slightest, and indeed it's an absurdity. I merely hinted at her obtaining temporary assistance as the widow of an official who had died in the service, if only she has patronage, but apparently your late parent had not served his full term and had not indeed been in the service at all of late. In fact, if there could be any hope, it would be very ephemeral, because there would be no claim for assistance in that case, far from it. And she is dreaming of a pension already, a go-ahead lady. Yes, she is, for she is credulous and good-hearted, and she believes everything from the goodness of her heart, and she is like that. Yes, you must excuse her," said Sonia, and again she got up to go. "But you haven't heard what I have to say." "No, I haven't heard," muttered Sonia. "Then sit down." She was terribly confused. She sat down again a third time. "Seeing her position with her unfortunate little ones, I should be glad, as I have said before, so far as lies in my power, to be of service, that is, so far as is in my power, not more. One might, for instance, get up a subscription for her, or a lottery, something of the sort, such as is always arranged in such cases by friends or even outsiders desirous of assisting people. It was of that I intended to speak to you. It might be done." "Yes, yes, God will repay you for it," faltered Sonia, gazing intently at Pyotr Petrovitch. "It might be, but we will talk of it later. We might begin it today. We will talk it over this evening and lay the foundation, so to speak. Come to me at 7 o'clock. Mr. Lebeziatnikov, I hope, will assist us. But there is one circumstance of which I ought to warn you beforehand, and for which I venture to trouble you, Sofya Semyonovna, to come here. In my opinion, money cannot be, indeed it's unsafe to put it into Katerina Ivanovna's own hands. The dinner today is a proof of that. Though she has not, so to speak, a crust of bread for tomorrow and, well, boots or shoes or anything, she has bought today Jamaica rum, and even, I believe, Madeira and coffee. I saw it as I passed through. Tomorrow it will all fall upon you again. They won't have a crust of bread. It's absurd, really, and so, to my thinking, a subscription ought to be raised so that the unhappy widow should not know of the money, but only you, for instance. Am I right? I don't know. This is only today, once in her life. She was so anxious to do honour, to celebrate the memory, and she is very sensible, but just as you think, and I shall be very, they will all be, and God will reward, and the orphans. Sonia burst into tears. Very well then, keep it in mind. And now will you accept, for the benefit of your relation, the small sum that I am able to spare, from me personally? I am very anxious that my name should not be mentioned in connection with it. Here, having so to speak anxieties of my own, I cannot do more. And Pyotr Petrovitch held out to Sonia a 10-rouble note carefully unfolded. Sonia took it, flushed crimson, jumped up, muttered something and began taking leave. Pyotr Petrovitch accompanied her ceremoniously to the door. She got out of the room at last, agitated and distressed, and returned to Katerina Ivanovna, overwhelmed with confusion. All this time Lebeziatnikov had stood at the window or walked about the room, anxious not to interrupt the conversation when Sonia had gone. He walked up to Pyotr Petrovitch and solemnly held out his hand. "I heard and saw everything," he said, laying stress on the last verb. "That is honourable, I mean to say, it's humane. You wanted to avoid gratitude, I saw, and although I cannot, I confess, in principle sympathise with private charity, for it not only fails to eradicate the evil but even promotes it, yet I must admit that I saw your action with pleasure. Yes, I like it." "That's all nonsense," muttered Pyotr Petrovitch, somewhat disconcerted, looking carefully at Lebeziatnikov. "No, it's not nonsense. A man who has suffered distress and annoyance as you did yesterday, and who yet can sympathise with the misery of others, such a man, even though he is making a social mistake, is still deserving of respect. I did not expect it indeed of you, Pyotr Petrovitch, especially as according to your ideas. Oh, what a drawback your ideas are to you! How distressed you are, for instance, by your ill luck yesterday," cried the simple-hearted Lebeziatnikov, who felt a return of affection for Pyotr Petrovitch. "And what do you want with marriage, with legal marriage, my dear, noble Pyotr Petrovitch? Why do you cling to this legality of marriage? Well, you may beat me if you like, but I am glad, positively glad it hasn't come off, that you are free, that you are not quite lost for humanity. You see, I've spoken my mind, because I don't want in your free marriage to be made a fool of and to bring up another man's children. That's why I want legal marriage," Luzin replied in order to make some answer. He seemed preoccupied by something. "Children? You referred to children." Lebeziatnikov started off like a warhorse at the trumpet call. "Children are a social question, and a question of first importance, I agree, but the question of children has another solution. Some refuse to have children altogether because they suggest the institution of the family. We'll speak of children later, but now as to the question of honour, I confess that's my weak point. That horrid, military, Pushkin expression is unthinkable in the dictionary of the future. What does it mean indeed? It's nonsense. There will be no deception in a free marriage. That is only the natural consequence of a legal marriage, so to say. It's corrective, a protest. So that indeed it's not humiliating, and if I ever, to suppose an absurdity, were to be legally married, I should be positively glad of it. I should say to my wife, 'My dear, hitherto I have loved you, now I respect you, for you've shown you can protest.' You laugh. That's because you are incapable of getting away from prejudices. Confound it all. I understand now where the unpleasantness is of being deceived in a legal marriage, but it's simply a despicable consequence of a despicable position in which both are humiliated. When the deception is open, as in a free marriage, then it does not exist, it's unthinkable. Your wife will only prove how she respects you by considering you incapable of opposing her happiness and avenging yourself on her for her new husband. Damn it all. I sometimes dream if I were to be married, foo. I mean, if I were to marry, legally or not, it's just the same. I should present my wife with a lover if she had not found one for herself. My dear, I should say, I love you, but even more than that, I desire you to respect me. See, am I not right?" Pyotr Petrovitch sniggered as he listened, but without much merriment. He hardly heard it indeed. He was preoccupied with something else, and even Lebeziatnikov at last noticed it. Pyotr Petrovitch seemed excited and rubbed his hands. Lebeziatnikov remembered all this and reflected upon it afterwards. Chapter 2. It would be difficult to explain exactly what could have originated the idea of that senseless dinner in Katerina Ivanovna's disordered brain. Nearly 10 of the 20 roubles, given by Raskolnikov for Marmeladov's funeral, were wasted upon it. Possibly Katerina Ivanovna felt obliged to honour the memory of the deceased suitably, that all the lodgers, and still more Amalia Ivanovna, might know that he was in no way their inferior, and perhaps very much their superior, and that no one had the right to turn up his nose at him. Perhaps the chief element was that peculiar, poor man's pride, which compels many poor people to spend their last savings on some traditional social ceremony, simply in order to do like other people and not to be looked down upon. It is very probable, too, that Katerina Ivanovna longed on this occasion, at the moment when she seemed to be abandoned by everyone, to show those wretched, contemptible lodgers that she knew how to do things, how to entertain, and that she had been brought up in a genteel, she might almost say aristocratic colonel's family, and had not been meant for sweeping floors and washing the children's rags at night. Even the poorest and most broken-spirited people are sometimes liable to these paroxysms of pride and vanity, which take the form of an irresistible nervous craving. And Katerina Ivanovna was not broken-spirited. She might have been killed by circumstance, but her spirit could not have been broken. That is, she could not have been intimidated. Her will could not be crushed. Moreover, Sonia had said with good reason that her mind was unhinged. She could not be said to be insane, but for a year past she had been so harassed that her mind might well be overstrained. The later stages of consumption are apt, doctors tell us, to affect the intellect. There was no great variety of wines, nor was there Madeira, but wine there was. There was vodka, rum, and Lisbon wine, all of the poorest quality, but in sufficient quantity. Besides the traditional rice and honey, there were 3 or 4 dishes, one of which consisted of pancakes, all prepared in Amalia Ivanovna's kitchen. 2 samovars were boiling, that tea and punch might be offered after dinner. Katerina Ivanovna had herself seen to purchasing the provisions with the help of one of the lodgers, an unfortunate little Pole who had somehow been stranded at Madame Lipovexel's. He promptly put himself at Katerina Ivanovna's disposal, and had been all that morning and all the day before running about as fast as his legs could carry him, and very anxious that everyone should be aware of it. For every trifle he ran to Katerina Ivanovna, even hunting her out at the bazaar, at every instant called her Pani. She was heartily sick of him before the end, though she had declared at first that she could not have got on without this serviceable and magnanimous man. It was one of Katerina Ivanovna's characteristics to paint everyone she met in the most glowing colours. Her praises were so exaggerated as sometimes to be embarrassing. She would invent various circumstances to the credit of her new acquaintance and quite genuinely believe in their reality. Then all of a sudden she would be disillusioned and would rudely and contemptuously repulse the person she had only a few hours before been literally adoring. She was naturally of a gay, lively, and peace-loving disposition. But from continual failures and misfortunes she had come to desire so keenly that all should live in peace and joy, and should not dare to break the peace, that the slightest jar, the smallest disaster, reduced her almost to frenzy, and she would pass in an instant from the brightest hopes and fancies to cursing her fate and raving, and knocking her head against the wall. Amalia Ivanovna, too, suddenly acquired extraordinary importance in Katerina Ivanovna's eyes, and was treated by her with extraordinary respect, probably only because Amalia Ivanovna had thrown herself heart and soul into the preparations. She had undertaken to lay the table, to provide the linen, crockery, and so on, and to cook the dishes in her kitchen, and Katerina Ivanovna had left it all in her hands and gone herself to the cemetery. Everything had been well done. Even the tablecloth was nearly clean. The crockery, knives, forks, and glasses were, of course, of all shapes and patterns, lent by different lodgers, but the table was properly laid at the time fixed, and Amalia Ivanovna, feeling she had done her work well, had put on a black silk dress and a cap with new mourning ribbons, and met the returning party with some pride. This pride, though justifiable, displeased Katerina Ivanovna for some reason, as though the table could not have been laid except by Amalia Ivanovna. She disliked the cap with new ribbons too. Could she be stuck up, the stupid German, because she was mistress of the house and had consented as a favour to help her poor lodgers? As a favour, fancy that! Katerina Ivanovna's father, who had been a colonel and almost a governor, had sometimes had the table set for 40 persons, and then anyone like Amalia Ivanovna, or rather Ludwigovna, would not have been allowed into the kitchen. Katerina Ivanovna, however, put off expressing her feelings for the time, and contented herself with treating her coldly, though she decided inwardly that she would certainly have to put Amalia Ivanovna down and set her in her proper place, for goodness only knew what she was fancying herself. Katerina Ivanovna was irritated too by the fact that hardly any of the lodgers invited had come to the funeral, except the Pole who had just managed to run into the cemetery, while to the memorial dinner the poorest and most insignificant of them had turned up, the wretched creatures, many of them not quite sober. The older and more respectable of them all, as if by common consent, stayed away. Pyotr Petrovitch Luzin, for instance, who might be said to be the most respectable of all the lodgers, did not appear, though Katerina Ivanovna had the evening before told all the world, that is, Amalia Ivanovna, Polenka, Sonia and the Pole, that he was the most generous, noble-hearted man with a large property and vast connections, who had been a friend of her first husband's and a guest in her father's house, and that he had promised to use all his influence to secure her a considerable pension. It must be noted that when Katerina Ivanovna exalted anyone's connections and fortune, it was without any ulterior motive, quite disinterestedly, for the mere pleasure of adding to the consequence of the person praised. Probably, taking his cue from Luzin, that contemptible wretch Lebeziatnikov had not turned up either. What did he fancy himself? He was only asked out of kindness, and because he was sharing the same room with Pyotr Petrovitch and was a friend of his, so that it would have been awkward not to invite him. Among those who failed to appear were the genteel lady and her old maidish daughter, who had only been lodgers in the house for the last fortnight, but had several times complained of the noise and uproar in Katerina Ivanovna's room, especially when Marmeladov had come back drunk. Katerina Ivanovna heard this from Amalia Ivanovna, who, quarrelling with Katerina Ivanovna and threatening to turn the whole family out of doors, had shouted at her that they were not worth the foot of the honourable lodgers whom they were disturbing. Katerina Ivanovna determined now to invite this lady and her daughter, whose foot she was not worth, and who had turned away haughtily when she casually met them, so that they might know that she was more noble in her thoughts and feelings and did not harbour malice, and might see that she was not accustomed to her way of living. She had proposed to make this clear to them at dinner, with allusions to her late father's governorship, and also at the same time to hint that it was exceedingly stupid of them to turn away on meeting her. The fat colonel, major, he was really a discharged officer of low rank, was also absent, but it appeared that he had been not himself for the last 2 days. The party consisted of the Pole, a wretched-looking clerk with a spotty face and a greasy coat, who had not a word to say for himself and smelt abominably, a deaf and almost blind old man who had once been in the post office and who had been from immemorial ages maintained by someone at Amalia Ivanovna's. A retired clerk of the commissariat department came too. He was drunk, had a loud and most unseemly laugh and only fancy, was without a waistcoat. One of the visitors sat straight down to the table without even greeting Katerina Ivanovna. Finally, one person having no suit appeared in his dressing gown, but this was too much, and the efforts of Amalia Ivanovna and the Pole succeeded in removing him. And the Pole brought with him, however, 2 other Poles, who did not live at Amalia Ivanovna's, and whom no one had seen here before. All this irritated Katerina Ivanovna intensely. For whom had they made all these preparations, then, to make room for the visitors the children had not even been laid for at the table? But the 2 little ones were sitting on a bench in the furthest corner with their dinner laid on a box, while Polenka, as a big girl, had to look after them, feed them, and keep their noses wiped like well-bred children's. Katerina Ivanovna, in fact, could hardly help meeting her guests with increased dignity and even haughtiness. She stared at some of them with special severity and loftily invited them to take their seats. Rushing to the conclusion that Amalia Ivanovna must be responsible for those who were absent, she began treating her with extreme nonchalance, which the latter promptly observed and resented. Such a beginning was no good omen for the end. All were seated at last. Raskolnikov came in almost at the moment of their return from the cemetery. Katerina Ivanovna was greatly delighted to see him, in the first place, because he was the one educated visitor, and, as everyone knew, was in 2 years to take a professorship in the university, and secondly because he immediately and respectfully apologized for having been unable to be at the funeral. She positively pounced upon him, and made him sit on her left hand. Amalia Ivanovna was on her right. In spite of her continual anxiety that the dishes should be passed round correctly and that everyone should taste them, in spite of the agonizing cough which interrupted her every minute and seemed to have grown worse during the last few days, she hastened to pour out in a half-whisper to Raskolnikov all her suppressed feelings and her just indignation at the failure of the dinner, interspersing her remarks with lively and uncontrollable laughter at the expense of her visitors, and especially of her landlady. "It's all that cuckoo's fault, you know whom I mean. Her. Katerina Ivanovna nodded towards the landlady. "Look at her, she's making round eyes. She feels that we are talking about her and can't understand. Foo, the owl! Ha ha! Cough, cough, cough! And what does she put on that cap for? Cough, cough, cough. Have you noticed that she wants everyone to consider that she is patronizing me and doing me an honor by being here?" I asked her like a sensible woman to invite people, especially those who knew my late husband, and look at the set of fools she has brought. The sweeps, look at that one with the spotty face. And those wretched Poles, ha ha ha, cough, cough, cough. Not one of them has ever poked his nose in here. I've never set eyes on them. What have they come here for, I ask you? There they sit in a row. Hey, Pan, she cried suddenly to one of them. Have you tasted the pancakes? Take some more. Have some beer. Won't you have some vodka? Look, he's jumped up and is making his bows. They must be quite starved, poor things. Never mind, let them eat. They don't make a noise anyway, though I'm really afraid for our landlady's silver spoons, Amalie Ivanovna, she addressed her suddenly, almost aloud. If your spoon should happen to be stolen, I won't be responsible, I warn you. Ha ha ha, she laughed, turning to Raskolnikov, and again nodding towards the landlady, in high glee at her sally. She didn't understand again. Look how she sits with her mouth open. An owl, a real owl, an owl in new ribbons. Ha ha ha. Here, her laugh turned again to an insufferable fit of coughing that lasted 5 minutes. Drops of perspiration stood out on her forehead, and her handkerchief was stained with blood. She showed Raskolnikov the blood in silence, and as soon as she could get her breath began whispering to him again with extreme animation and a hectic flush on her cheeks. Do you know, I gave her the most delicate instructions, so to speak, for inviting that lady and her daughter. You understand of whom I am speaking. It needed the utmost delicacy, the greatest nicety. But she has managed things so that that fool, that conceited baggage, that provincial nonentity, simply because she is the widow of a major and has come to try and get a pension and to fray out her skirts in the government offices, because at 50 she paints her face, everybody knows it. A creature like that did not think fit to come, and has not even answered the invitation which the most ordinary good manners required. I can't understand why Pyotr Petrovitch has not come. But where's Sonia? Where has she gone? Ah, there she is at last. What is it, Sonia? Where have you been? It's odd that even at your father's funeral you should be so unpunctual. Rodion Romanovitch, make room for her beside you. That's your place, Sonia. Take what you like. Have some of the cold entree with jelly, that's the best. They'll bring the pancakes directly. Have they given the children some? Polenka, have you got everything? Cough, cough, cough. That's all right. Be a good girl, Lida, and, Kolya, don't fidget with your feet, sit like a little gentleman. What are you saying, Sonia? Sonia hastened to give her Pyotr Petrovitch's apologies, trying to speak loud enough for everyone to hear and carefully choosing the most respectful phrases which she attributed to Pyotr Petrovitch. She added that Pyotr Petrovitch had particularly told her to say that, as soon as he possibly could, he would come immediately to discuss business alone with her and to consider what could be done for her, and so on, and so on. And so on. Sonia knew that this would comfort Katerina Ivanovna, would flatter her and gratify her pride. She sat down beside Raskolnikov. She made him a hurried bow, glancing curiously at him. But for the rest of the time she seemed to avoid looking at him or speaking to him. She seemed absent-minded, though she kept looking at Katerina Ivanovna, trying to please her. Neither she nor Katerina Ivanovna had been able to get mourning. Sonia was wearing dark brown, and Katerina Ivanovna had on her only dress, a dark striped cotton one. The message from Pyotr Petrovitch was very successful. Listening to Sonia with dignity, Katerina Ivanovna inquired with equal dignity how Pyotr Petrovitch was, then at once whispered almost aloud to Raskolnikov that it certainly would have been strange for a man of Pyotr Petrovitch's position and standing to find himself in such extraordinary company, in spite of his devotion to her family and his old friendship with her father. "That's why I am so grateful to you, Rodion Romanovitch, that you have not disdained my hospitality, even in such surroundings," she added almost aloud. "But I am sure that it was only your special affection for my poor husband that has made you keep your promise." Then once more, with pride and dignity, she scanned her visitors and suddenly inquired aloud across the table of the deaf man, wouldn't he have some more meat, and had he been given some wine? The old man made no answer, and for a long while could not understand what he was asked, though his neighbours amused themselves by poking and shaking him. He simply gazed about him with his mouth open, which only increased the general mirth. What an imbecile! Look, look! Why was he brought? But as to Pyotr Petrovitch, I always had confidence in him, Katerina Ivanovna continued, and of course he is not like— With an extremely stern face she addressed Amalia Ivanovna so sharply and loudly that the latter was quite disconcerted. "Not like your dressed-up draggletails whom my father would not have taken as cooks into his kitchen, and my late husband would have done them honour if he had invited them in the goodness of his heart." "Yes, he was fond of drink, he was fond of it, he did drink," cried the commissariat clerk, gulping down his 12th glass of vodka. "My late husband certainly had that weakness, and everyone knows it," Katerina Ivanovna attacked him at once, "but he was a kind and honourable man who loved and respected his family. The worst of it was his good nature made him trust all sorts of disreputable people, and he drank with fellows who were not worth the sole of his shoe. Would you believe it, Rodion Romanovitch, they found a gingerbread cock in his pocket. He was dead drunk, but he did not forget the children." "A cock? Did you say a cock?" shouted the commissariat clerk. Katerina Ivanovna did not vouchsafe a reply. She sighed, lost in thought. "No doubt you think, like everyone, that I was too severe with him," she went on, addressing Raskolnikov. "But that's not so. He respected me very much. He was a kind-hearted man, and how sorry I was for him sometimes. He would sit in a corner and look at me. I used to feel so sorry for him. I used to want to be kind to him, and then would think to myself, be kind to him and he will drink again. It was only by severity that you could keep him within bounds." "Yes, he used to get his hair pulled pretty often," roared the commissariat clerk again, swallowing another glass of vodka. "Some fools would be the better for a good drubbing, as well as having their hair pulled. I am not talking of my late husband now," Katerina Ivanovna snapped at him. The flush on her cheeks grew more and more marked, her chest heaved. In another minute she would have been ready to make a scene. Many of the visitors were sniggering, evidently delighted. They began poking the commissariat clerk and whispering something to him. They were evidently trying to egg him on. "Allow me to ask, what are you alluding to?" began the clerk. "That is to say, whose, about whom, did you say just now? But I don't care. That's nonsense, widow. I forgive you. Pass." And he took another drink of vodka. Raskolnikov sat in silence, listening with disgust. He only ate from politeness, just tasting the food that Katerina Ivanovna was continually putting on his plate to avoid hurting her feelings. He watched Sonia intently. But Sonia became more and more anxious and distressed. She, too, foresaw that the dinner would not end peaceably, and saw with terror Katerina Ivanovna's growing irritation. She knew that she, Sonia, was the chief reason for the genteel lady's contemptuous treatment of Katerina Ivanovna's invitation. She had heard from Amalia Ivanovna that the mother was positively offended at the invitation, and had asked the question, how could she let her daughter sit down beside that young person? Sonia had a feeling that Katerina Ivanovna had already heard this, and an insult to Sonia meant more to Katerina Ivanovna than an insult to herself, her children, or her father. Sonia knew that Katerina Ivanovna would not be satisfied now, till she had shown those draggletails that they were both. To make matters worse, someone passed Sonia from the other end of the table, a plate with 2 hearts pierced with an arrow cut out of black bread. Katerina Ivanovna flushed crimson, and at once said aloud across the table that the man who sent it was a drunken ass. Amalia Ivanovna was foreseeing something amiss, and at the same time deeply wounded by Katerina Ivanovna's haughtiness, and to restore the good humour of the company and raise herself in their esteem, she began, apropos of nothing, telling a story about an acquaintance of hers, Karl from the chemist's, who was driving one night in a cab, and that the cabman wanted him to kill, and Karl very much begged him not to kill, and wept and clasped hands, and frightened and from fear pierced his heart. Though Katerina Ivanovna smiled, she observed at once that Amalia Ivanovna ought not to tell anecdotes in Russian. The latter was still more offended, and she retorted that her Vater aus Berlin was a very important man, and always went with his hands in pockets. Katerina Ivanovna could not restrain herself, and laughed so much that Amalia Ivanovna lost patience and could scarcely control herself. "Listen to the owl!" Katerina Ivanovna whispered at once, her good humour almost restored. She meant to say he kept his hands in his pockets, but she said he put his hands in people's pockets. Cough, cough, and have you noticed, Rodion Romanovitch, that all these Petersburg foreigners, the Germans especially, are all stupider than we? Can you fancy any one of us telling how Karl from the chemist's pierced his heart from fear, and that the idiot, instead of punishing the cabman, clasped his hands and wept and much begged? Ah, the fool! And you know she fancies it's very touching and does not suspect how stupid she is. To my thinking, that drunken commissariat clerk is a great deal cleverer. Anyway, one can see that he has addled his brains with drink. But you know, these foreigners are always so well behaved and serious. Look how she sits glaring. She is angry. Ha 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 ha! Cough, cough, cough! Regaining her good humour, Katerina Ivanovna began at once telling Raskolnikov that when she had obtained her pension, she intended to open a school for the daughters of gentlemen in her native town T. This was the first time she had spoken to him of the project, and she launched out into the most alluring details. It suddenly appeared that Katerina Ivanovna had in her hands the very certificate of honour of which Marmeladov had spoken to Raskolnikov in the tavern, when he told him that Katerina Ivanovna, his wife, had danced the shawl dance before the governor and other great personages on leaving school. This certificate of honour was obviously intended now to prove Katerina Ivanovna's right to open a boarding school, but she had armed herself with it chiefly with the object of overwhelming those two stuck-up draggle-tails if they came to the dinner, and proving incontestably that Katerina Ivanovna was of the most noble, she might even say aristocratic family, a colonel's daughter, and was far superior to certain adventuresses who have been so much to the fore of late. The certificate of honour immediately passed into the hands of the drunken guests, and Katerina Ivanovna did not try to retain it, for it actually contained the statement en toutes lettres that her father was of the rank of a major and also a companion of an order, so that she really was almost the daughter of a colonel. Warming up, Katerina Ivanovna proceeded to enlarge on the peaceful and happy life they would lead in T, on the gymnasium teachers whom she would engage to give lessons in her boarding school, one a most respectable old Frenchman, one Mangot, who had taught Katerina Ivanovna herself in old days and was still living in T, and would no doubt teach in her school on moderate terms. Next she spoke of Sonia, who would go with her to T, and help her in all her plans. At this, someone at the further end of the table gave a sudden guffaw. Though Katerina Ivanovna tried to appear to be disdainfully unaware of it, she raised her voice and began at once speaking with conviction of Sonia's undoubted ability to assist her, of her gentleness, patience, devotion, generosity, and good education, dapping Sonia on the cheek and kissing her warmly twice. Sonia flushed crimson, and Katerina Ivanovna suddenly burst into tears, immediately observing that she was nervous and silly, that she was too much upset, that it was time to finish, and as the dinner was over, it was time to hand round the tea. At that moment, Amalia Ivanovna, deeply aggrieved at taking no part in the conversation and not being listened to, made one last effort, and with secret misgivings ventured on an exceedingly deep and weighty observation that in the future boarding school she would have to pay particular attention to Die Wäsche, and that there certainly must be a good dame to look after the linen, and secondly that the young ladies must not novels at night read. Katerina Ivanovna, who certainly was upset and very tired, as well as heartily sick of the dinner, at once cut short Amalia Ivanovna, saying she knew nothing about it and was talking nonsense, that it was the business of the laundry maid and not of the directress of a high-class boarding school to look after Diawesha. And as for novel reading, that was simply rudeness, and she begged her to be silent. Amalia Ivanovna fired up and, getting angry, observed that she only meant her good, and that she had meant her very good, and that it was long since she had paid her gold for the lodgings. Katerina Ivanovna at once set her down, saying that it was a lie to say she wished her good, because only yesterday, when her dead husband was lying on the table, she had worried her about the lodgings. To this Amalia Ivanovna very appropriately observed that she had invited those ladies, but those ladies had not come, because those ladies are ladies and cannot come to a lady who is not a lady. Katerina Ivanovna at once pointed out to her that as she was a slut, she could not judge what made one really a lady. Amalia Ivanovna at once declared that her Vater aus Berlin was a very, very important man, and both hands in pockets went, and always used to say, "Poof, poof." And she leapt up from the table to represent her father, sticking her hands in her pockets, puffing her cheeks, and uttering vague sounds resembling "poof, poof," amid loud laughter from all the lodgers, who purposely encouraged Amalia Ivanovna, hoping for a fight. But this was too much for Katerina Ivanovna, and she at once declared, so that all could hear, that Amalia Ivanovna probably never had a father, but was simply a drunken Petersburg Finn, and had certainly once been a cook, and probably something worse. Amalia Ivanovna turned as red as a lobster and squealed that perhaps Katerina Ivanovna never had a father, but she had a Vater aus Berlin, and that he wore a long coat and always said, "Poof, poof." Katerina Ivanovna observed contemptuously that all knew what her family was, and that on that very certificate of honour it was stated in print that her father was a colonel, while Amalia Ivanovna's father, if she really had one, was probably some Finnish milkman, but that probably she never had a father at all, since it was still uncertain whether her name was Amalia Ivanovna or Amalia Ludvigovna. At this Amalia Ivanovna, lashed to fury, struck the table with her fist, and shrieked that she was Amalia Ivanovna, and not Ludvigovna, that her Vater was named Johann, and that he was a burgomeister, and that Katerina Ivanovna's Vater was quite never a burgomeister. Katerina Ivanovna rose from her chair, and with a stern and apparently calm voice, though she was pale and her chest was heaving, observed that if she dared for one moment to set her contemptible wretch of a father on a level with her papa, she, Katerina Ivanovna, would tear her cap off her head and trample it underfoot. Amalia Ivanovna ran about the room, shouting at the top of her voice that she was mistress of the house, and that Katerina Ivanovna should leave the lodgings that minute. Then she rushed for some reason to collect the silver spoons from the table. There was a great outcry and uproar. The children began crying. Sonia ran to restrain Katerina Ivanovna, but when Amalia Ivanovna shouted something about the yellow ticket, Katerina Ivanovna pushed Sonia away and rushed at the landlady to carry out her threat. At that minute the door opened, and Pyotr Petrovitch Luzin appeared on the threshold. He stood scanning the party with severe and vigilant eyes. Katerina Ivanovna rushed to him.